Hello, everyone, and welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. My name's PS Moore, and I'm the Manager for Global Alumni Engagement at YorkU. Thank you for joining us for today's session titled Why Digital Platforms Are 400-Year-Old From East India Company to Amazon. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land I'm on. Because we may not be gathered in the same place, the land I'm about to acknowledge might not be for the territory you are on. Please take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you are on. As a member of York University community, I recognize that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as Takaranto has been taken care by the Anishinaabeg Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis community. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, we would like to conduct a quick poll before this session begins. The question is, how would you rate your knowledge regarding the topic of today's presentation? The poll should pop up on your screen right now. I'll give everyone a moment to respond. And thank you, as it helps for our speakers to more about audience. If you need help with Zoom webinar, feel free to click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question. Our team is ready to help you. That same button may be used to submit questions for our guest speaker to answer during the Q&A period. You may enter questions at any time during the presentation. Please note that all your questions and comments are visible to our panelists and staff working behind the scene. We ask that you keep your comments relevant and respectful. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Alicia Lim. Alicia is an assistant professor of technological humanities at the Department of Humanities of Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. They have completed a PhD at the University of Toronto and a postdoctorate in critical data studies at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Lim is also currently guest editing a special issue of Social Text Online, a quarterly scholarly journal forging creative connections between critical theory and political practice, entitled Colonial Studies of the Platform. Welcome, Dr. Lim. You can switch on the camera and unmute yourself.
It says I can't start my video because it's been disabled by the host. Great, fantastic.
And it's working.
Yay! Thank you so much, PS. I wish that you and your music were at the start of every one of my lectures.
No worries. I'll be back after a presentation for the Q&A. You can now share your screens. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I am so thrilled for this chance to share my research with my colleagues.
Sorry, Alicia, to cut you off, but your slide is a bit cut off. It's square instead of rectangular. Yeah.
It's square instead
Now
of...
it's good. Now it's good.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So I noticed there are colleagues here as well as old friends and old fellow activists, and I'm so touched and excited to share some of these ideas. Today I'll be presenting on my current work and how it led me to becoming the guest editor of 2 special issues. This on the screen is the first one. It's an issue of Social Text entitled Colonial Studies of the Platform. and the second one is forthcoming. And I am hoping that in today's presentation, you might consider contributing to the second special issue. You can think of this talk as an informal call for papers. And at the end, I would be thrilled to hear any ideas you might want to submit, any percolating ideas for the second issue that we might be able to brainstorm or soundboard. So the work I'm presenting today is ambitious. It is nothing short of field formation. The new field that I am working to build together with my collaborators is one that we call colonial studies of the platform. I'm a platform scholar, which means that I study platforms like Amazon, Google, Uber, and my specialty is social media platforms. So Meta and its properties like Instagram and Facebook, and I've started studying TikTok and RedNote. I've written about how platform business models are at the heart of so much of our current crisis, especially the rise of political extremism, of populism, and of alienating polarization. So, big worries. This field of platform studies that I'm a part of is very young. It's only 18. I find this field so important and so fascinating because unlike other broader digital fields like surveillance studies or media studies, platform studies is about business. It follows the money. This field analyzes how business and revenue-based decisions scale out to the level of a new global ontology, what we can know and what we can be, all decided in backroom revenue projects. When we think about the gig economy, about social media, about AI knowledge, I think it is no exaggeration to say that these decisions affect us at an ontological level. Platform studies is rarely vague. It does not make general statements about societal upheavals by black box unknowable algorithms. It opens the black box. It studies specific corporate annual reports, specific algorithms like EdgeRank, advertising terms and conditions, and user remixes to explain exactly how we have arrived at this current polycrisis. I love the way that my field relentlessly follows the money. My critique of the field is that this young discipline only traces the polycrisis back 50 years to the dawn of neoliberalism, as you can see in a couple of these really canonical texts. It goes so far as to say that before 2018, state actors and public institutions were historically the designated custodians of common good. So my question, and the question of my work, is why don't platform scholars go deeper and further back in history? Do my colleagues in this field willfully ignore colonialism? Colonial scholars already do what I would call platform studies. For example, in this spectacular analysis, The Intimacies of Four Continents, colonial scholar Lisa Lowe analyzes the British East India Company, a corporation that created our division of humanity between human, who is non-human, and who is pre-modern, in order to exploit populations for their profit. She comes to these conclusions by drilling down into corporate documents. She went to London to look at the decisions that ruled over four continents. She read corporate papers from the British Colonial Office, the Foreign Office, the Slave Trade and African Department, the War and Colonial Department, the records of the treaty, and the Royal Letter Department. She used centralized company documents to make original and startling connections between settler colonialism on one continent in North America and the African slave trade, or between the abolition of slavery and the importing of Chinese and South Asian indentured labor. The book connects phenomena that were previously studied separately, and she comes to new profound conclusions about the inevitable inhumanity of modern liberalism by looking at corporate documents specifically on trade, on law, on correspondence, on sessional records, acts and treaties and ordinances. I see platform studies as doing a continuation of this kind of colonial work because it ties corporate activity to deep ontological questions. How do data infrastructures and business models shape culture? How do they shape belief and identity? How does the platform or the corporate machine as state, which is the poetic description in The Stack by Benjamin Bratton, that it is the machine as state, how does it nudge its users towards market-friendly definitions of value and worth? I depend on platform studies to counter my students' biases. They ask great questions and they say things like TikTok spreads disinformation because people are stupid. I understand how they came to that, but I respond with quotes from platform scholars like Jose Van Dyke and Tarleton Gillespie. And I say people are not stupid, they are algorithmically nudged into homogenous neighborhoods of like-minded, susceptible consumers. And in those places, belonging becomes stronger than facts. These are ontological breakthroughs, in my opinion, the ways that business decisions shape our identities and our values in order to feed consolidated global power in a self-destructive empire on the verge of collapse. And this is not the first time in history. These breakthroughs would be even more profound if they expanded to the British East India Company, which also went through the same stages we're seeing today of financialization, cannibalization, the war to end all wars, and collapse. In other words, we have more wisdom and histories of resistance at our disposal than a mere 50 years of neoliberalism. We have a 400-year-old world of platforms, not a 50-year-old world of platforms. If we think about modern platforms as continuations of these pre-industrial platforms, what new questions does that open up? What tactics of resistance and decolonial methods might we be able to access? I argue that our contemporary crisis demands a theory of digital platforms that is grounded in the humanities. Social science, software, and management studies alone are not enough for the big picture solutions. We need history, we need critical theory, we need Black studies, which already explains capitalist exploitation as a post-Enlightenment method of measurements, classifications, data collection, that always produces populations that are alienated and exploitable and disposable. It's crucial to combine modern corporate specificity and an existing body of literature documenting 400 years of this cycle repeating itself today. But platform studies willfully ignores the past. It draws on fields like business, management studies, and software engineering that inherit the same disavowals of the East India Company itself. Except for some exceptional anomalous articles, I loved reading these articles. This is Bill Cook's The Denial of Slavery in Management Studies, or Nicholas Fiore's Plantation Energy from Slave Labor to Machine Discipline, or Meredith Whittaker, who is, fun fact, the CEO of Signal, and her incredible article, Origin Stories, Plantations, Computers, and Industrial Control. Unfortunately, these are outliers, and most of platform studies absorbs the disavowals of business management, and so it ignores the past. The reasons for this are understandable. Platform scholarship is sexy. It pursues cutting-edge markets, and it interprets very lucrative hype. For platform scholars, our research is funded by corporate and state sources who are eager to weaponize and exploit our results. For example, shirk future funding goals, which verge on a fever dream, in my opinion. Quote, a possible future where even as surveillance monitors our brains, quantum encryption breaks the last hope of privacy protection and a digital backlash erupts. Wow. Almost 100 years ago, here in Toronto, Harold Innis railed that the development of government funding bodies like the Tri-Council made universities the handmaids of the modern state. Funding-deprived universities depend on our digital curricula to attract students. Our funders and our employers, they do not ask for history lessons. They ask for a competitive edge, a cybersecure future, a reserve pool of labor to supply political parties during periods of crisis, in Harold Innis's words 100 years ago. In other words, to defend political and commercial interests when, in Shirk's words, quantum encryption breaks the last hope of privacy protection and a digital backlash erupts. The business world that we're expected to cooperate with intentionally obscures its dependence on modern slavery, racism, and land theft. And so I can see how it's easy in this field for 400 years of colonial history to seem irrelevant. So I've written a paper to make these ideas simple and easy to incorporate. The arguments in my paper are not new. There is a small handful of brilliant scholars who have begun colonial interrogations of the digital, starting with Simone Brown in surveillance studies, Ruha Benjamin, Nick Coldry, and Ulysses Mejias, and Sebastian Lujuere in digital studies, and there is now a growing number. My contribution is to bring this colonial history into platform studies, not digital studies broadly, but specifically platform studies, which I insist is so valuable because platform studies is so unwavering, systematically reverse engineering platform problems down to specific causes and effects. Even before going to print, my paper has elicited attention, which has been very exciting. So on the left, Social Text has invited me to guest edit a special issue of its journal. And on the right, the journal Platforms and Society has invited me to write a provocation to guide future platform scholars, which is very exciting. I really want to shout out to Platform and Society. They're a brand new journal, and they have a lot of the same goals as mine. And the works they publish and promote are really critical platform studies. And their editorial board includes undaunted, brilliant scholars from the Global South. I'm a really big fan. I'm really thrilled, especially by the chance to guest edit an issue of Social Text, because it fulfills my goal to extend platform studies to a humanities audience, to an audience of critical and colonial studies. And I hope to build this new curriculum with them. I invited a co-editor from Columbia University whose ideas really inform my own, Ezekiel Dixon Roman. We will be guest editing a second journal for the International Communications Association later this year. And that one will be geared towards the social sciences in order to ensure that this conversation incorporates both traditional digital studies and humanities studies. And I hope to bring all of these authors together for a symposium here at York. We have not yet released a call for papers for that second journal, and so I'm hoping that today some of my colleagues and friends might consider submitting. Okay, so I now want to go into a little bit of the detail of my own paper to explain my method. So first, my paper is a primer to platform studies written for the audience of the humanities. And second, it offers specific historic examples of what I call platform operations in British Malaya in the 19th century. It starts with a primer, which introduces some of the canonical platform studies papers, including this one, cited thousands of times by Jean-Christophe Plantin and his colleagues. They explain in a very platform studies approach that platforms are so consolidated and domineering today because they are a new form of infrastructure distinct from the ideal. And an example of the traditional infrastructural ideal they offer is the railways. So they explain railways start off as independent regional systems tailored to local needs, and then later they get integrated into a global internetwork with standardized specifications. But Plantin and his colleagues explain at the foundations, these railway systems are rooted in the infrastructural
We're very sorry for the inconvenience. It looks like Professor has gotten some internet problems. We'll try to get her back online pretty quickly. Please bear with us.
I got back.
Welcome back, Professor. Do you want one of us to share the slides? Or are you good?
Easier. I can share them again.
Okay, no worries.
I'm so sorry about that. Would I have a bit of extra time to finish?
Yeah, we can take the extra.
I really apologize. So let's see. Okay, I think we were on this page. All right. Okay, so you can hear me?
Yes.
Great. So, right. So the results, as I was saying, of this platform society is a society in which, according to my peers, my platform scholar peers, social and economic traffic is increasingly channeled by an overwhelmingly corporate global platform ecosystem. For colonial theorists, Plantin and his colleagues, and the thousands of scholars who quote them, are demonstrating a type of willful ignorance. This is the first land treaty of the British East India Company, signed on the last day of the year 1600 between the company and Queen Elizabeth. And it granted the company the rights to have, purchase, receive, possess, enjoy, and retain lands, rents, privileges, liberties, jurisdictions, franchises, and hereditaments over the East Indies or modern-day Indonesia. But these rights expanded across other regions almost immediately. These treaties set up prefabricated codes, agreements, and rules as an infrastructural program to facilitate trade between other businesses within its global ecosystems. The colonies, in other words, were already platform societies and have existed as such for hundreds of years, where, quote, social and economic traffic is increasingly channeled by an overwhelmingly corporate global platform ecosystem. I call for a platform studies that combines the specificity of modern platforms with this historic context that outlines and clearly forecasts modern platform violence. It's been thrilling to receive submissions from around the world, and I'm going to end by sharing just quickly a little bit of three abstracts as examples of the kind of field that we're trying to open up. So again, the first special issue of Social Text, we've already completed that call for papers, and these are, we already have our authors for that, but we're still going to do a second issue with an International Communications Association journal. So I hope that you might consider applying. So as a sample, here is one of the exciting abstracts that we've received. So this is from two PhD students from Johns Hopkins and Harvard, an assistant professor from the University of Notre Dame. And they write about the colonial logics of synthetic data. They write, recently, OpenAI, NVIDIA, and Mostly AI have all begun offering platforms for synthetic data, advertising them as a means to simulate real-world data in domains where human or real-world data is sparse or highly regulated by privacy law. So I'm going to skip to the last paragraph. We turn to an episode from mid-18th century cartographic surveys of what is today Lake Superior to discuss how the fabrication of Isle Philippot, a non-existent phantom island named in honor of the patron Louis Philippot, served to encourage continued financing of future colonial expeditions in the region for the Secretary of State of the French Navy. From false islands to synthetic data, we track how products of emplotment are traded and sold to secure the futurity of accumulation. We love that. A second one that we selected is this one from an associate professor and his computer science and software engineer collaborator. And it is called The Autocolonial Churn, Colonialism, Computation, and Contemporary Information Systems. Today's information platforms, particularly those in generative AI and LLMs, parallel earlier formations. While classical colonialism was rooted in territorial expansion, these new technologies enact autocolonialism, simultaneously exploiting both the workers within societies that develop them and where they are exported. And then they go into specifics about how the East India Company trade settlement in Calcutta on the Hooghly River became a hub for knowledge collection. And in the last paragraph, data aggregation through mapping, language categorization, commodity quantification, and demographic enumeration was further supplemented by the rise of Orientalist scholarship. And the last line there. Ultimately, this vast information network functioned as the software through which British colonial rule was imposed and maintained in South Asia. And then this very last one, which is from a lecturer, assistant professor at the University of Exeter, called The Behavioral Regime, the Colonial Search for Artificial General Intelligence. This essay proceeds through a comparative analysis of two significant instances of situational behavioral modeling, Micronesia and the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica. Specifically, Herbert Simon coined the term artificial intelligence at the Dartmouth Conference in 1956. Not a computer scientist, but a management science expert. He said that in order to make a computer think like a human, we need to make it think like a corporation. So, as it will become more throughout this essay, these languages of abstraction, subjectivity, individuals, and data will become more grounded as we locate the behavioral situation as the emergence of a genealogical practice of data dispossession and racial capitalism that persists and undergirds the contemporary search for artificial general intelligence. Throughout this essay, I read the comparative analysis not as disparate events of situational behavioral modeling, but as an example of fungibility in terms of Saidiya Hartman and Tiffany Lethabo King. For instance, as King writes, while fungibility as theorized by Hartman and Wilderson emerges from a place of unfettered domination and marks blackness as an open space of figurative and material exchange, I argue that fungibility is in fact a product of white anxiety and representation, and an attempt to get in front of or anticipate Black fugitive movement. So these are some of the exciting ways that scholars around the world are kind of taking up this call and really just playfully thinking together with us about how we can open modern platform studies to incorporate humanities methods of reading deeply and critically into colonial history. And I really hope that some of my colleagues and friends might consider submitting your works as we open up this new field. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for a timely and informative talk, Doctor. We now have some time for questions, so please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll give everyone to put their questions in. I can start with one that got me very intrigued. So what prompted you to compare the modern day digital platforms to East India Company?
So I would say for me, it was really my upbringing. So I was born in Toronto and got the accent, but then when I was a small child, we moved to Singapore. And growing up in Singapore, you know, from the very beginning of primary school history, the first thing we learned was about a company, the East India Company, and that we were born from the judicious wisdom of these executives of the East India Company. And it continues, you know, throughout our cultural experience in Singapore, the most prestigious institutions are named after these company executives to this day. The prestigious hotels and schools and hospitals and institutions, that shadow is very real and very alive in the pressure to do well for the Cambridge O-level exams, the Cambridge A-level exams, which I think are no longer using the Cambridge model, but the legacy is so alive. Even for us, we were so proud to be going to a colonial convent school. I have a terrible anecdote, which is that my mother, who is British, she managed to ban the video game Mortal Kombat from the entire island. And I believe it's because she appeared to be an authority on television news because she brought her, you know, British sort of identity. So this power was very strong and very much felt. So when I learned about platform studies, you know, in my PhD, and I started learning about how these large multinational companies can shape identity, it felt like déjà vu. It felt like, oh, I know this story. And so I asked my professors, are you considering the East India Company? And I really want to give credit. During my defense, I had two committee members who were so excited by this idea. Wendy Chun and Ronaldo Walcott. And it's because of their enthusiasm that I have proceeded. So I owe it to this academic community for supporting me.
That's a lovely story. And for someone who comes from India, we have studied effectively about East India Company and all that parallel for the 300 years that they were there. So yes, I can completely understand when the history makes sense with the modernization. I think so that's something I get pretty excited about too. So we have another question. It's more to do with the explanation that you gave on the railways of the infrastructure because it got a bit interrupted. If you could go back to it and quickly explain how railway infrastructure is distinguished from the platforms that we were talking about.
Oh, thank you for that. That's right. That was interrupted. Let me think. How did where exactly was I interrupted? Let me check it. Okay, I have it here. So, right. So, the paper that I was referencing is this, extremely highly cited, important paper from infrastructure studies, and platform studies has ever since adopted this theory to understand how platforms are so powerful and so domineering because of how they use infrastructures. And so the distinction is that the infrastructural ideal of the past is kind of grassroots, that the infrastructures that we have that came from mom and pop businesses that wanted the best of everybody around, and that the difference today is that platforms, they come in as prefab. So they come into a new industry or a new country already prefabricated and centralized from the ground up. And the details of this paper, as many of my colleagues probably know this paper, is that platforms are interoperable. So they are already designed with ways that other businesses can plug in very easily. So app developers, advertisers, corporate partners can very easily plug in, and this makes them very irresistible and very quickly powerful. And so, yeah, so of course, reading this for me, it's shocking that, to think that this is this idea of a prefab centralized power coming in, with infrastructure that's designed to optimize everything to its profit model. This is so old to me. What ideal? What previous ideal are we talking about?
No, that completely makes sense.
Right.
Moving on to the another one that we have gotten is what could you share a bit more on what you guys are expecting and looking for in your second special issue that you guys are working on?
I hope this means people will submit. And I really think that York is so well positioned to be a leader in this conversation. I really am looking forward to the symposium to bring all the authors together because my colleagues are so brilliant. So, okay, great. Please submit. For the second, what we're looking for is really the same as the first. We want to push the social sciences, which, the International Communications Association is very much rooted in social sciences. We want to push the social sciences to open up these empiricist positivist ideas to their colonial roots. And on the social tech side, that's so easy to do. It's so easy to see how platforms are colonial, but it's very hard to push. Uh, it was hard for us to even get peer reviewers. They were saying this is the problem. We don't have any humanities scholars who want to read your stuff because it's too techy. So hopefully on the ICA side, that will be easier. There's lots of eager reviewers, but are they willing to consider that this pre-industrial corporation counts as a platform? So it will ultimately be the same thing. We're looking specifically for papers that connect specifics of modern platforms. So no sort of general um, anxieties or sort of descriptions of like the digital crisis we're in, but specifics like this approach to terms and conditions matches the East India Company's terms and conditions that they established through, I don't know what it would be, through schools. I mean, an example that I give in my paper is that software, modern platform software, I see an equivalent in treaties, in how the Hudson's Bay, for example, designed treaties, how the East India Company designed treaties. Those treaties became code, they became law in the same way that software does today. So a paper that takes a very specific element of platforms today and compares it to a specific element of population management and governance of these colonial companies.
Really makes sense. So moving on, we have another question. How vulnerable is this field to the attack on university research, as we are seeing in US, and how can those of us in other countries support this work in the face of this?
Could you say that again? How relevant is this work? Say that
So,
again.
how vulnerable is this field to the
Oh,
attack on
vulnerable.
the university research in the States? And how can those of us in other countries support this work in the face of this?
Oh, is this work vulnerable in the misdemeanors? You know, I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say about that. I haven't even thought about if this work is vulnerable. Is it vulnerable? And in some ways, I have never felt so welcome as I have since I have started working as a platform scholar. As you can probably tell, my background was not digital, it was in the humanities. I have been a humanities scholar throughout my undergrad and master's, um, where I actually studied art history. Um, but it was sort of the digital side of, in any case. So it hasn't been until now that I can attach anything to do with platforms, really, especially digital platforms that it has opened doors for me. It has opened opportunities for funding and for collaborations. Uh, in a week and a half, I'm going to two countries, to Qatar in the UAE and then to China to talk with colleagues who are working on similar ideas on AI and governance. The UAE is the first country in the world to use AI to develop its legislation. And so I've had very excited reception from my colleagues, from our colleagues there to talk about that. And then at Peking University in Beijing, I'll be giving this same talk. And that's also been met with great excitement. So I'd love to hear from my colleagues here about how you might perceive vulnerabilities. It's sort of like since I moved away from talking about, you know, queer of color art to digital platforms, I've felt much less vulnerable. But please warn me if I haven't thought of something.
Okay, let's take the next one. How should one theorize the notion of digital labor? While there are some scholarships like Fuchs and others who defend the idea of free labor that digital capitalism exploits. However, there are contestations from classical Marxists to consider prosper as a labor. Where do you stand on this and how can one theorize it?
Good questions. This is Christian Fuchs, right? I believe this is about
Yeah.
Christian Fuchs. Tough one. And then maybe Tiziana Terranova. Um, yeah, no, these are great questions about labor. Oh, this opens a whole can of worms. So this is a very good question. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, these are questions about, so Christian Fuchs said that from a Marxist standpoint, even the fact that we scroll on social media, that we do anything on social media, we're contributing labor and it's unpaid labor. And then Tiziana Terranova, who I absolutely adore her writing, she wrote in 2000 about what does she call it? Digital labor, knowledge labor. That similarly, anything that we do online is a form of unpaid labor. Um, I don't agree with these things, and I'm really interested. So one of the papers that was submitted, the scholars that submitted, they talk about implotment. I love this idea. I actually have even we turned down a submission from well, I won't go into that. Anyway, so I love this idea of implotment because it's an idea based on Fred Moten and Stefano Harney, two radical Black thinkers, Fred Moten in particular, about how in individualistic capitalism we're encouraged to plot every aspect of our lives as something that we can be paid for or we can sell. There's that pressure on us to always think of everything that way. What better example is there than our online lives, where we have gone from wacky anarchic experimentations in the 90s to now being required to think of every utterance as property as a form of property that we should be privatizing, we should be keeping private. I have a paper I've also published recently called Abolish Privacy. There's a strong statement about rethinking the idea that every utterance we make, every act we do is a form of property or a form of labor. So this is a whole very interesting can of worms. Personally, I don't agree that these are the forms of labor to be concerned about when there is so much exploited labor involved in digital work. So maybe that's the question that this asker is getting at, which is a very clever one, which is in some ways the gentrification of concepts of labor. While Tarleton Gillespie and oh my goodness, I'm forgetting, but the excellent books, Kate Crawford, the excellent books about the work that goes into the invisible work, the work of moderating, the work of data industries. My colleague Preeti Raghunath writes brilliantly about the data industries, the traumatizing work that people are doing in cleaning data constantly. This is labor. This is the labor of our current platforms. And this is labor that is easy to not forget, but to be distracted from when we're talking about scrolling as labor. So, controversial subject, unfinished debate. I'd love to hear more from this particular asker. Tell me more.
Well, we can obviously share your email address towards the end if
Great.
someone wants to reach out afterwards and keep the conversation going, because we can only answer so many questions.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a couple more, and then I'm afraid that we'll be running out of time. So the next one comes is, how would you study Bitcoin using the platform scholarship?
Is this Anatolio?
No, I think it's Victor,
Well, Antulio should answer, my wonderful colleague who's a crypto expert, unlike myself. But wait, just read me the question one more time so I could think about it.
So it's, how would you study Bitcoin using platform scholarship?
Oh, yes. So, okay. Antulio, I think you're here. You're the expert on this. Please ask him. From a platform lens, what I would bring, the only thing that I would bring is, so the interest of platform scholars is exactly how are decisions made by the business model. And it is so tempting to think about a lot of the digital culture shifts that are happening, including, currency changes and the stocks, plummeting stocks couldn't be more tangible in terms of the social ramifications of something like crypto, for example. And so platform studies resist the temptation to think about any of these phenomena as social or cultural or sort of organic human reactions to things, and instead asks how exactly was there a business model that created incentives of a certain kind? How are the human activities that we're seeing the response to a perverse incentive of some kind? I hope that answers the question. I find it very fascinating, and I would love to talk more about it. Just thinking about how some of these like tweaks in returns on investment, really, on how certain business decisions to raise the ROI end up creating incentives of a certain kind, and that plays out in this very social, cultural way. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does it. So let's end the session with another question. I know there are a lot more questions that we can't answer. If Professor, if you're fine, we would like to share your email address so that the attendees can reach you out.
I'd love to. Should I do that in the Q&A or the chat?
Oh, no worries. The
Okay.
staff will do it as soon as we end the Q&A. It will be, and it's already done for everyone. So you guys can use that email address. So let's take the last question, and then we can end the session. The question goes, when you talk about colonialism, or rather post-colonialism, do you mean British colonialism specifically? Or are you also looking about modern colonialism, such as ongoing Canadian and American colonialism, Chinese, Israeli, etc.?
Fantastic question. I think these are really important questions. So when we submitted, the amazing thing about doing special issues is that you kind of get into this like a fighting arena with every brilliant scholar in so many. So, we have the board of social text and the board and reviewers of our journal, which I don't want to mention until we've actually confirmed that one. But at the International Communications Association, they ask us these questions too. They're very good questions. And the big debate, especially at Social Text, was, are you distinguishing between colonialism and imperialism? So maybe that's what this question is getting at. So colonialism being, at least I take the definition by Nefertiti Tadiar, that colonialism was when countries would go and settle in another country and change the laws and change the, what is allowed and what is culturally allowed and not. And then imperialism is sort of like remote control of another country through cultural export. So, I think that when it comes to platforms, yeah, just thinking about the ways that platforms are, yes, maybe remote, but still really determining local labor conditions, thinking about the gig economy, um, it's such a blurred thing. So I think this is a really important question. Like when we talk about colonialism, you know, is this really a shift? Is this a shift to imperialism, or is this a continuation? But also, I think that the question is asking, are we going to consider Chinese platforms? Maybe that's the question. But the answer is yes. And please do bring all of these really anti-colonial or anti-imperial critiques. The purpose, and I think maybe this is a great way to end this discussion, the purpose at heart of this inquiry, of this attempted field formation expanding, is let's think about platforms in a really zoomed out way. Let's think about platforms not just in terms of their threats to modern capitalist individualistic civil liberties like privacy. Let's also think about them in terms of fundamentally depending on racial hierarchies, on land theft, on the entire post-Enlightenment humanist project of who counts as human. So yes, the answer is yes to everything. Please bring all of these.
Thank you so much once again for being with us today. It has been really informative talk and a great session with the Q&A. Another thank you to everyone who participated with us. Dr. Lim, once again, thank you so much, and you're welcome to now turn off your video if you would
Thank you
like.
so much, PS. You're an incredible co-host. Can I get a list of everyone's questions in case there's any that I can return to?
Yes, we'll try to
Great.
get them to you.
Okay, thank you so much to everyone who's come.
So, a recording of the video will be posted on our YouTube channel. Please see the link in the chat for the YouTube channel. We have one more poll question for all the audience that's present. How would you rate your knowledge of today's topic following the discussion? It should pop up on your screen right now. Join us on May 14 for the Feminism for Mothers featuring Andrea O'Reilly, professor and coordinator of the Bridging Program for Women at School of Gender, Sexuality and Women's Studies of the Faculty of Liberal Arts and Professional Studies. To register for these events and learn more about our upcoming sessions, please visit yorku.ca, alumni and friends. Thank you for being with us, and be well.